the last chapter. So the last time we went, which was maybe 3 weeks ago, we did chapter 27, which was a nautical adventure. Let's see here. So just to remember here. So remember, St. Paul appeals to Caesar, and even though eventually, the the Roman authorities really don't see a reason to lay a charge on Paul, they already appealed to Caesar. So their hands are kind of tied. He was a Roman citizen. He had the right as a Roman citizen to appeal to Caesar, have his case heard by Caesar himself. And so they send him out. And remember, he has quite an adventure here. They're traveling on various ships. He's traveling with a Roman guard, who maybe seems to be the head guard, seems to be a grain officer, because this constant travel between Alexandria, Egypt down here, and bringing the wheat of the Nile to Rome, there's constant boat traffic. So they catch a ride often on these wheat ships, these cargo ships. So anyway, from last time, remember, they had quite an adventure. They're changing different ships. They're trying to make their way over to Rome. And then here, Paul warns them, once they get here into Crete, they're getting pretty late in the season, in the sailing season. So it's getting to be late fall going into winter, when normally the seas were too hazardous to travel. Paul warns them that they should make winter here in Crete, but they want to push on. And there may have been a profit motive in that. The owner of the wheat ship, wants to get paid and get the ship back so that he can keep making money. So the safe thing to do, the normal thing to do, would be to winter there for 3 months and wait till the seas calm down again. But instead, they decide to press on, thinking they can sneak it in. So the ship gets caught in 14 days of storm. They're lucky to stay alive, and it's just kind of battered by the elements, and the storm pushes the ship all the way here over 14 days to Malta, this tiny island of Malta, which is only 17 miles by 9 miles, but it's an ancient island, founded by Greeks from Corinth as a colony of Corinth in about 750 BC, and then it's taken over by the Romans around 200 BC. So anyway, they finally come ashore on Malta. The ship is lost, but it kind of crashes, it falls apart near the shore, and they swim ashore. All right, and then here shows, so the normal port in Malta was Valletta. That was where normally ships would come in. They land, because they're being pushed and battered, they actually land here, and this area then comes to be called St. Paul's Bay after this incident. So it wasn't the normal or most desirable bay. And actually the sailors probably would recognize Malta from this port, Valletta, but initially they're kind of, they don't recognize where they are. They don't realize they're on Malta right away because they landed in an unfamiliar part here. All right. So that's kind of a summary of where we are. Now here we go. We'll start chapter 28, the last chapter. So he says, now when they had escaped, or here it translated that when they had been brought safely through, so they had escaped danger, in other words, the danger of the shipwreck, the danger of drowning. They then found out that the island was called Malta. And the natives, and here there's so Malta was actually, it comes from this actually a Phoenician word, a Canaanite word that was given to it by the first inhabitants, the Phoenicians, and the Canaanite word, which is related to Hebrew, actually means refuge. So this island was a refuge, meaning that probably something similar had happened hundreds and hundreds of years before. And so some people say that when St. Luke says they found out that the island was called Malta, that it's kind of like saying he may have been putting it that way to say that the island was appropriately named, right? Because Malta was this derivative from Melita, which was this Canaanite word for refuge. And Paul, as a Hebrew speaker, certainly would have known that. So it's almost like this island was well named when it was named Malta, because it was indeed a refuge for us, a refuge provided by God. And the natives, so the natives would have been, he's referring to them in this kind of, as kind of them, as kind of other, because they weren't Greco-Romans. They spoke a dialect of Phoenician, I think, and so they were another people. And in the Greek or Greco-Roman mind, they were considered barbarians, Vavari, because to them the language sounded like ba 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 ba. But despite the fact that the kind of Greco-Roman perception of them was that they were uncivilized, maybe, in spite of this, he notes, and the natives showed us unusual kindness. So they didn't expect to be treated this way by this kind of other people and other culture, but they were unusually kind, for they kindled a fire and made us all welcome. Now remember, they just suffered shipwreck and swam into shore and kind of wash up on shore. It's late fall, beginning of winter. It's possibly cold. So the fact that they came and made a fire for them, possibly helped really save them. They kindled a fire, made us all welcome because of the rain that was falling and because of the cold. All right, so you get the sense that winter is upon them. But when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on the fire, so in other words, he's taking the initiative to keep the fire going. They set up the fire, but he's going out and gathering more sticks to dump on the fire to keep it going, because I think the number they estimate that survived the shipwreck was something like 286. 286 people were shipwrecked. So this is a large group. It's going to need a large fire. So he grabs a big bundle of wood, he dumps it on the fire, and lo and behold, what happens? A viper came out because of the heat and fastened on his hand. So this sounds strange, but apparently there's this, I read there's a quote from Lawrence of Arabia, T.E. Lawrence, the famous Lawrence of Arabia, and he relates a story of something similar that happened to him in his adventures, that because of the cold, the snake had gone kind of rigid, right? And it was kind of laying on a branch of some kind of rigid because of the cold. They're cold-blooded. And so when the branch was picked up, the snake was kind of in almost like a hibernation. It didn't react, but then it gets thrown into the fire. The heat warms it up. It kind of wakes up. And of course, it's trying to get out of the fire. So it seems like this is what happened here, that didn't notice that the snake was inside this wood. And as he puts it in the fire, he's arranging the fire. The snake wakes up and bites his hand. And they say a viper here, meaning a poisonous snake. This is the word for a venomous, poisonous snake. Now, some people say that on Malta today, there are no poisonous snakes. And so they'll question the story, or how is this possible? Then there was poisonous snakes there, but we're talking about 2,000 years ago. It's definitely possible that there was some venomous snakes on the island at that time. All right, so the viper bites him on the hand. It's like you can fasten on his hand, hanging from his hand, it says here. So you can imagine this, the viper has bit into him and is just dangling from his hand. 4, so when the natives saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, "No doubt this man is a murderer, whom though he has escaped the sea, yet justice does not allow to live." All right, so this is this kind of mentality is very reflective of the mentality of ancient peoples. They, including the Greco-Romans, who considered themselves so much more civilized than these people, but then, there was a very strong idea about fate, that you couldn't escape fate, right? And so they assume from this that, and they see that Paul's a prisoner, right? Because he's with Roman guards on this ship, and probably even once they shipwrecked, they keep him under some kind of custody. He's going to say later in this chapter that he's chained permanently to one of the Roman soldiers, kind of lightly chained. But so anyway, the natives can tell that he's a prisoner, And so they say, aha, here's what's going on. This whole ship has suffered shipwreck because this man is a murderer. He's done something wrong, and the gods have decided that he must be punished. And so the sea tried to exact its punishment on him, but somehow he escaped this. But you can't escape fate. So what's happened is somehow this man has managed to defy death one time, defy fate in the sea, but now the gods will not be outdone. Fate cannot be avoided. Now this venomous snake will exact the gods' punishment on him. This is how they're thinking. Verse 5, but he shook off the creature into the fire and suffered no harm. 6, however, they were expecting that he would swell up or suddenly fall down dead. But after they had looked for a long time and saw no harm come to him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god. So, imagine this scene. They see this. I mean, it would be a shocking scene to see a snake come out and bite somebody, and he just throws it off. And they're waiting to see, is his hand, his arm going to start swelling up? Is he going to have some kind of anaphylactic shock or something, fall down? Nothing happens. And so then they decide, again, of this superstitious kind of mind, wow, no human could do this, so he must be a god. So they go from one extreme to another. 7, in that region, there was an estate of the leading citizen of the island, whose name was Publius, who received us and entertained us courteously for 3 days. So that, and this us, remember, Luke is with him. Luke was with him on this shipwreck. So, and it seems that there was actually a title on Malta, something literally like the first citizen. So it was some kind of position, official or unofficial, but he was considered kind of the leading influence maker on the island, perhaps the kind of governor of the island, something like that. So he receives them and entertains them. And for him, he's got a good Roman name. He's obviously a Roman citizen. He would be currying favor with the Roman authorities by helping out these Roman soldiers who had been shipwrecked. All right, verse 8. And it happened that the father of Publius lay sick of a fever and dysentery. Paul went in to him and prayed, and he laid his hands on him and healed him. So when this was done, the rest of those on the island who had diseases also came and were healed. They also honored us in many ways, and when we departed, they provided such things as were necessary. So here, you have this healing going on, and of course, there's a parallel with Jesus's work, right? As we're wrapping up Acts and this 2-volume work of Luke and Acts, remember that at the beginning of Luke, Luke says to Theophilus that he's going to relate the things that Jesus began to do and teach. And so then now throughout Acts, we've seen that those things that Jesus began to do and teach didn't end with Jesus's crucifixion, but he empowered his disciples to follow through. And they are repeating many of the things that Jesus did, especially early in Acts. We saw Peter and John healing people, etc. Now the story has shifted more to Paul, but the same thing. We're going to be seeing, Luke wants us to be sure to notice that the works and the things that Jesus did are still happening in his name through his people. So kind of like I was saying on the sermon on Sunday, that we are the body of Christ. We are Christ extended through the ages. He comes into our midst on Sunday and empowers us to be him, to continue the work that he started. So and remember here, Luke is a physician. So it may be that Paul is healing through prayer, but it also may be that Luke is empowered in some ways to help with these medical problems. And again, the island's small, so it's reasonable that the news would spread very quickly and people would come. And so now the people honored them, and when they departed, they provided supplies, food, rations, etc., for their trip. Everyone with me? Mm-hmm. All right, so verse 11. After 3 months, meaning they spent the winter, they wintered in Malta, as they probably should have done in Crete, because it was too dangerous to sail. So they stay there in Malta for 3 months. They enjoy the hospitality. They have this ministry to the local people there. After 3 months, we sailed in an Alexandrian ship whose figurehead was the twin brothers, which had wintered at the island. So again, this Alexandrian wheat ship going to Rome had wisely realized that the season got too late, and it stopped and wintered there. So they board another grain ship from Alexandria bound for Rome. And he's saying that the figurehead, so the what do they call that? The mast, it's kind of like the mascot that was at the front of the ship, to whom they dedicated the ship, was Castor and Pollux. So Gemini. These were the kind of gods that they dedicated the ship and under their protection. So they take this ship. Verse 12, and landing at Syracuse, we stayed 3 days. All right, so let me show you here. So they're here on Malta, and then after 3 months after the winter there, they sail to Syracuse here, and that was probably only a day's sail. So they reach Syracuse. It's probably early spring, and we're thinking that the year now is probably 60. That this happened, maybe around September, October of the year 59. Now we're early in the year 60 AD, and they reach Syracuse here. All right. They stayed there 3 days. From there, we circled around and reached Rhegium. And after 1 day, the south wind blew, and the next day we came to Puteoli, where we found brethren, meaning Christians, and were invited to stay with them 7 days. And so we went toward Rome. All right, so now this is interesting. They come to Syracuse, they stay there 3 days, then they catch a good southerly wind coming out of the south that pushes them to Rhegium here on the tip of the boot of Italy. All right. And then they caught another good wind, which was fortunate to catch another good wind that took them all the way here to Puteoli, which was the main harbor, right? So in this area of Naples, this was the main harbor. It was a deep harbor, a good harbor where these large grain ships would come in. And then from Puteoli to Rome, you had this road called the Appian Way. The Appian Way is a kind of cobblestone-lined road that connected this major port to Rome. All right. But before that, they land in Puteoli. And there they found Christian brethren. Now remember, Paul has never been to Italy before. He had often talked about and dreamt of reaching Rome in Italy, but he had never been there before. So there are Christians there before Paul comes. How did they get there? How did these Christians get there? Well, we know Josephus tells us that there's a Jewish community in Puteoli in 4 BC. And so we can only assume that, the scriptures don't tell us, but obviously there were other apostles. Peter was busy, John was busy, Thomas, etc. So at some point, someone else had evangelized this area, or perhaps Christians who were, Jews who were on pilgrimage to Jerusalem had encountered, maybe they were there on the day of Pentecost, one of the many nations represented there. And then they went back carrying this Christian message. But in any event, there's an existing Christian community that welcomes Paul around 60 AD. All right, let's see. And they stayed with them 7 days. So perhaps we're to assume that the officer, the Roman officer in charge, had some kind of business to attend to. Right? So they enter into the port, and if he's a grain officer, he may have had to do something with arranging the offloading of the grain or something or other. And they extend Paul, while they're doing this work, they extend him some freedom to go and stay with this Christian community, although probably there's a guard with him. And so finally, after 7 days with them, they went toward Rome on the Appian Way, heading north. 15. And from there, when the brethren heard about us, so here he means the brethren in Rome, the Christians in Rome. So there's also a Christian community there. And when those brethren, the Roman Christians, heard about us, they came to meet us as far as Appii Forum and 3 Inns. All right, so here, they went from Malta to Syracuse to Rhegium. They come up the coast here to this port, and they're walking the rest of the way to Rome. But as soon as the Roman Christians hear Paul's here, they take off down the road to meet them and welcome them and greet them. And so the Three Taverns is here, and then the Forum on the Appian Way is here, about another 10 miles. So some come this far, some come a little bit further to greet him. Now, what's this reminiscent of? So this, to the ancient world, they would have seen here an image of a conquering general, or emperor returning. There would be a kind of military procession, perhaps, coming into the city of Rome, where they would be greeted by the crowds, welcoming them as heroes, etc., coming out to meet them on the road and to welcome this victor, their leader. But then the interesting thing is, what does this remind us of? This ironic kind of entry, because Paul's probably chained between two Roman guards.
Palm Sunday,
exactly. I mean, so it's not a coincidence. There's here comes the one who's going to bring the good news, and he's this conquering general, because Christianity is going to conquer the Roman world, but they just don't know it yet, and it's coming in this kind of ironic entry, just like it happened with Jesus. But the interesting thing here is the word for gospel, the Greek word for gospel, the evangelos, evangelia, the pronouncement of the good news, that actually this word at root, how it was used before Christians, it was used as, yes, it meant the good news, but typically it was used in the plural, and it meant the announcement that would go before a general or an emperor proclaiming his victories, right? So that was the good news that was announced. So Roman soldiers, these kind of scout party or something, advance party would go to the city, and they would announce, here comes Emperor so-and-so or General so-and-so who was victorious over these people and victorious over these people, et cetera, and has come to, bring safety and security to this city. And this was good news for the people. So this is also the Christians take over this word, but it has kind of this ironic meaning, like we see in Jesus's entry into Jerusalem, Paul's entry here into Rome. Like conquering heroes, they're bringing this good news of victory that it provides benefits to the people it's being announced to, but it's not the kind of military victories that they're used to hearing about. It's Christ's victory over sin and death, and they're bringing the good news of this victory. All right. So they meet him at the Appian Forum in 3 Inns. When Paul saw them, he thanked God and took courage. He was encouraged at this response, and who wouldn't be? I mean, at this point, he's been in prison, basically. He's been under arrest for several years now. He's taken this treacherous journey where he's almost died. And now he comes there and he's greeted by these Christians who are happy to see him. And how encouraging that must have been for him. 16. Now, when we came to Rome, the centurion delivered the prisoners to the captain of the guard. But Paul was permitted to dwell by himself with the soldier who guarded him. So for some reason, they extend Paul this extra courtesy because he's a Roman citizen. They allow him to kind of rent his own lodging somewhere in Rome, but they keep a soldier with him. And the soldier probably would have been chained to Paul, but perhaps kind of loosely. Perhaps there would have been maybe several feet of a light chain, and that typically the soldiers would change maybe every 4 hours or so. That they would change they would take off whatever was binding them to Paul, switch it to the other soldier, etc. So they have him under a light guard, but he has under this kind of house arrest. So he has a certain amount of freedom. And 17. And it came to pass after 3 days that Paul called the leaders of the Jews together. So we know from all of Acts, again and again, the pattern with Paul was he would go into a new town, and first and foremost, he would look for the Jews. He would look for the Jewish community. He would go to the synagogue. Well, now he's under house arrest. We know there are several synagogues in Rome at this point, but he can't get there. He's under house arrest. So he calls the leaders to him, and they come to visit him. So when they had come together, he said to the men and brethren, though I have done nothing against our people or the customs of our fathers, yet I was delivered as a prisoner from Jerusalem into the hands of the Romans. All right, so he's talking to his fellow Jews who are here in Rome. And this opening kind of salvo would have put the Jews in Jerusalem in a very bad light. I mean, he's basically saying, the Romans are what's the word? Overlords. They have us under their thumb, and yet the leaders of Jerusalem worked with them, cooperated with these enemies in order to turn me over, and I've done nothing. So this would have put them in a bad light. And then he's saying, so they delivered me into the hands of these hated Romans, 18, who, when they examined me, wanted to let me go because there was no cause for putting me to death. So he's making the Jerusalem leaders look very bad here. 19, but when the Jews spoke against it, meaning the Jews of Jerusalem, the Jewish leadership, I was compelled to appeal to Caesar. Not that I had anything of which to accuse my nation. So he wants to make it clear, I'm not bringing any charges against them. I'm not retaliating against them for this bad behavior. They have it out for me. 20, for this reason, therefore, I have called for you to see you and speak with you, because for the hope of Israel, I am bound with this chain. So he probably points literally to the chain that is binding him to this Roman soldier who's there. 21, then they said to him, we neither received letters from Judea concerning you, nor have any of the brethren who came reported or spoken any evil of you. All right, so that's a little bit odd, because at this point we know he's been in custody there for at least 2 years since the incident, the riot that nearly broke out in Jerusalem. So it's a little unusual, and we know that there's constant contact between the Jews of the diaspora and the Jewish religious leaders in Jerusalem. They're always coming during the feast and so on. So it's a little bit odd, actually, that they haven't heard anything particularly about Paul. So because they haven't heard anything negative, 22, they say, but we desire to hear from you what you think. For concerning this sect, we know that it is spoken against everywhere. So he means the sect of the Nazarenes, these Christians. So they haven't heard of Paul, but they definitely have heard of Christians, because we putting kind of some pieces together, probably around the year, probably around the year 49 AD. So about 11 years before this, there seems to have been riots among the Jews in Rome. And we're fairly certain that the cause of the dispute within the Jewish community was over the preaching of the gospel. So it was an inter-Jewish dispute over accepting Jesus. And so that put the Christians and the Jews in particular in a bad light in Rome, because then they were thought of as troublemakers and causing all kinds of problems. So certainly, Christianity has been there in Rome for at least 11 years, and they certainly would be well aware of the problems that it's caused. But about Paul in particular, they don't know anything. But nevertheless, even though they have a bad experience, probably a bad perception of these Christians, they're willing to hear Paul out. 23. So when they had appointed him a day, many came to him at his lodging, to whom he explained and solemnly testified of the kingdom of God, persuading them concerning Jesus from both the law of Moses and the prophets, from morning till evening. So we don't really get a summary of exactly what he was teaching, but we know enough from these summaries throughout Acts that we can kind of put together the kind of arguments that he was making for them. So he was using the law and the prophets. So remember, at this time, there's no fixed kind of Old Testament or Hebrew scriptures per se in the way that we have it now. But so he's using Moses and the prophets, going through the scriptures and showing where Jesus was foretold. 24. And some were persuaded by the things which were spoken, and some disbelieved. So, and this is the normal pattern that we see again and again with Paul. Some believe, some don't believe, and this fits into the prophecy that that there would be this, that God would come among his people. There would be this judgment. Some would be accounted unworthy because of their disbelief, but a remnant of faithful Israel would be collected, and this is what we saw start to happen at the beginning of Luke's gospel with St. John the Baptist's kind of miraculous birth and his important role in gathering this remnant of Israel that was willing to repent, etc. And to this remnant, the prophecy said the nations, the believing nations, would then be added. So this is all going according to kind of plan, and according to the way his other stops have gone. Some believed, some disbelieved. 25. So when they did not agree among themselves, they departed after Paul had said one word, or one saying, one particular thought. The Holy Spirit spoke rightly through Isaiah the prophet to our fathers, saying, go to this people and say, hearing you will hear and shall not understand, and seeing you will see and not perceive. For the hearts of this people have grown dull. Their ears are hard of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, lest they should understand with their hearts and turn, so that I should heal them. So he quotes this prophecy of Isaiah against them in particular. 28. Therefore, let it be known to you that the salvation of God has been sent to the Gentiles, and they will hear it. So you can imagine the kind of reaction that they would have to having this prophecy quoted against them, and then Paul basically declaring the prophecy has been fulfilled right now with you who refuse to believe. And so you're part of this, the majority of the people that fall away, but there is a faithful remnant, and to them we will add now the Gentiles, because they will accept it. 29. And when he had said these words, the Jews departed and had a great dispute among themselves. Then Paul dwelt 2 whole years in his own rented house, and received all who came to him, preaching the kingdom of God and teaching the things which concern the Lord Jesus Christ with all confidence, no one forbidding him. All right.
He still hasn't seen Caesar. He still hasn't seen Caesar. So what, he gets to stay there and not be chained to a soldier and preach in his own house?
Well, I mean, so he dwelt there 2 whole years in his own rented house, but it's probably still the same situation, that he's placed under this house arrest, except he gets to foot the bill rather than the Romans, and they probably still have this guard loosely attached to him because he's a prisoner apparently awaiting a court date with Caesar. We are left to assume. And so another 2 years, but what a strange kind of ending, right? I mean, that's it. That's the end of Acts. And, and really remember, this is a 2-volume work. It was meant to be read together. So from the beginning of the Gospel of Luke until now, and this is the end. So what do you think about, with this is at the end, what's going on? Why does St. Luke choose to end the gospel, the account in Acts?
I can answer this is that because the Acts of the Apostles are continuing with us. Yeah. I mean, it does not stop there. The story keeps going on. And if you were to record everything between now for the last 2,000 years, the history records all the Acts of the Apostles through the ages. And I think that's what's so beautiful, is that when I taught, I always said the Acts of the Apostles is still going on. We are parts of it. And we're doing exactly what the Lord had asked us to do. And who knows how many also years to come.
Absolutely. I mean, if we look at the Gospel of John, John says that, he's only written some things about what Jesus said and did that they might believe. But that if you were to write down all the things, the world couldn't even contain all the books that could be written about what Jesus said and did. And so the same seems to be applying here. We know that the church is at work apart from what's being narrated in Acts, because we have these Christian communities that no one ever tells us how the Christians got there. So there are definitely things that are not being related in the scriptures, and probably for the same reason, because there's just too much. But then,
for one thing, I've been reading about the life of the saints, and I had no idea that Peter went twice to Rome, and he even reached Spain, and and North Africa. That's what this biography about him says, and I had no clue that he had gone twice to Rome before the ending. And so there's so much more that we don't know that from the early church, and would love to know. It's amazing, really, how much there is to be told. Like St. James, we know he went to Spain because of the El Camino there, and the fact we don't know anything about all the Acts of the Apostles that took place.
Yeah, and there are other books. There's the Act, just like there are like 34 or so different Gospels. There are other Acts. There's the Acts of Paul. There's the Acts of Thomas. There's the Acts of John. most of these are written after, they're probably written more like in the 2nd century, 3rd century, and they're trying to capture other aspects of this history of what the disciples did, but they were never, some of those acts were kind of loosely accepted by the church, but they were never incorporated into the scriptures. So now where we find these stories is mainly in the lives of the saints, particularly the lives of the apostles, preserves these old traditions about what they were doing there at the beginning. But yeah,
Father, before I forget my question, I'm always interrupting, sorry.
Huh.
I have a tendency to forget the next second what I'm about to say. Did Paul die before Peter? And how many years before Peter?
That's a good question. I mean, we don't know for certain. There's a little bit of a debate actually about, there's a little bit of debate about what happened to Paul. I mean, the generally accepted view is that he was beheaded in Rome, probably somewhere around by the year 64 AD. He was beheaded in Rome, and he was not crucified, but rather beheaded because he was a Roman citizen. But there are some arguments that, based on reading like 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus, there's some arguments that, if we accept that Paul really wrote those letters, 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus, and you kind of take up all the kind of chronological and geographical clues in those letters and all the letters, that they argue that, well, Paul must have traveled more. He must have at some point been able to go further west, and then somehow he comes back to Rome and dies there. Perhaps there's a little bit of uncertainty, and Luke doesn't tell us. I mean, I think we can be pretty sure that he's going into Rome now. It's probably the spring of the year 60 AD when he enters into Rome, and Luke tells us that he spends 2 whole years there. But it's interesting. Why does Luke say? Why does he give us a time, right? He spends 2 whole years there, which means you would think that Luke is writing this, after the fact, obviously, and he knows that Paul spent 2 years there, and then something happened after specifically 2 years, but he doesn't tell us what that is. I mean, so almost kind of like you have to assume that he has more knowledge that he's not telling us, right? Because he knows that something happened after 2 years. And that, because otherwise, he would say, and then Paul spent, a great deal of time there, or something like that.
And did he appear before Caesar? We don't know what happened when he did appear before Caesar.
Yeah, we don't know. I mean, he kind of leaves us hanging, right? Which I think is, like you said, that's part of the purpose. I mean, part of the purpose is that the story isn't over, right? He doesn't give us a clean ending because he wants, like you said, he's to him, the story is not over. The story is really just beginning, because it's continuing with the rest of the church. So whatever happens to Paul, almost doesn't matter in a sense if he died or when exactly he died, because the work of the church is now is still being advanced. And the fact that Paul makes it to Rome, it's kind of like, and especially this image of him coming in as this conquering hero into Rome, because what in fact will happen, that it's not right away, but within 300 years, Christianity does conquer Rome, actually.
That's right.
You see the hymns that we sing for Saint
Constantine.
Constantly is talking about him as this kind of second Paul, right? He's the fulfillment of what Paul had seen. That Paul is going to take the message straight to the heart of the Roman Empire and convert the whole empire, to conquer spiritually the whole empire. And this does in fact come true for us as Orthodox with Constantine. He is this other figure that's kind of anointed by God to fulfill this mission.
Father?
Yeah.
On the topic which Luke does not go into, do we know why Paul was beheaded?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. That's the that's the tradition. But yeah, what was the accusation? Right. I mean, he's there because he's still under this charge of basically disturbing the peace in Jerusalem, of allowing a Gentile to enter into the temple, which for the Jews was a capital punishment, and the Romans recognized that particular law of the Jews. So, I mean, that was the charge hanging over him all this time. But yeah, that's a good question what it ends up being, because even the Roman authorities early on are kind of unsure whether there are any grounds for this. And then he appeals. You know, it is kind of strange then that in the end, I guess the Jews have some kind of influence perhaps in Rome and maybe exercise influence to get him beheaded. I don't know. That's a very good question. We're left with all these questions because of the kind of abrupt ending here.
I have one more question that before I forget it. We're told that the whole household of Caesar believed. In my imagination, and I'm very visual, I keep thinking that Paul was chained right in the basement of the palace of Caesar. And as these soldiers were coming and taking turns to chain to him, you know, and they were switching, back and forth, that through the soldiers that he was attached to, possibly that he converted them one by one, being chained in the household, close to the household of Caesar, because we're told that the whole household of Caesar, which is an unbelievable, it's like from the basement up. It's how I see it, is that he took over the whole palace of Caesar with the knowledge of the gospel and conquered it before he reached Caesar himself.
Yeah. And saying the whole household of Caesar wouldn't necessarily imply Caesar himself, but it would imply that the household was all the slaves, all the employees, etc. Could include his wife, perhaps, or relatives. So it doesn't necessarily imply Caesar himself. Yeah.
Father, which Caesar is this? What's his name?
Right. So if we're at 60 AD, I'm trying to remember who was.
It's before Nero, way before Nero.
Who was Caesar in 60? I want to say.
La Pax Romana took place under.
So, it was after Tiberius. I think Claudius was done by this time. Oh, it says.
I'll check it up. I'll check it out and Google. I'll Google it.
Yeah. Yeah, that was who was.
I think Titus became 70 AD was Titus's time as a general, and he eventually became emperor.
Right. Okay. Here it says Nero was emperor from 37. Wait. No. So Nero became emperor after the death of his adopted father, Claudius, Emperor Claudius. So Claudius died in 54. So by this time it was Nero.
It is Nero.
It was.
Yeah.
I just found it.
I knew that the persecutions were under Nero. That was the worst time. But I didn't know he had already was emperor. So that's good to know.
That could help explain, why Paul ended up being beheaded.
Yeah.
Just because of the kind of capriciousness of Nero.
Very interesting.
Yeah, so the ending of Acts, in a sense, is waiting to be written by us, and the church, the lives of the saints that we continue to read and which continue to be written in the church. These are all chapters of continuation of Acts.
I don't think that Luke, as a writer, would just stop like that. I think something prevented him from finishing it. I mean, that's just my sense of it. I have absolutely no historical basis for saying that or knowledge of it, but it just seems to me like there's some mystery there.
Yeah. And there is some, the New Testament scholarship does a lot of research on like contemporary literature, on Hellenistic literature, et cetera, which is apparent that Luke was familiar with, the Hellenistic literature. And there are some parallels. So it might seem more kind of off to us, but there was definitely a genre of Hellenistic literature that would employ this kind of tactic. So it's possible that Luke was just, using this genre to to communicate his message. But there are other cases, actually talking about the handling of the snake there earlier in the chapter when the snake bites Paul, right? So you remember, you guys have heard, no doubt, of Protestant churches, maybe in Appalachia in particular, where they handle snakes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, and this comes really from the end of the Gospel of Mark,
Yeah.
what
But Jesus.
they call the longer ending of Mark, because this longer ending of Mark, which is the last, I think, like 12 verses or something like that, it doesn't. Those verses don't appear in the earliest manuscripts of Mark, and those are this long, so-called longer ending. This is where Jesus says that you will how does he say it exactly? He doesn't, it's not a invitation to go handle snakes, but he's saying even if snakes are to bite you, it will have no effect. So and then it comes true here in Acts. So the interesting thing there with this longer ending of Mark, and there's one other famous case, the from the Gospel of John, the story of the woman caught in adultery.
Yes.
And Jesus comes and he famously says, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." So that story, pericope is what it's called, also does not appear in the earliest manuscripts of John. So these two stories are an unusual case. And what seems, and in fact, that first time the story of the woman in adultery appears, it actually appears in the middle of the Gospel of Luke. So it seems here that we're dealing with stories that have that were circulating very early on, but that didn't have a home somewhere else. And what happens actually if you look at the lectionary of our church, the lectionary is the assigned readings throughout the year. The lectionary of our church actually probably predates the final formation of the New Testament. So, in Matin, Orthodox, on Sunday mornings, we have 11 Eothinon gospel readings, right? This is the gospel we read in Matins. And we go in order, these 11, they go in order again and again. Well, the third of Eothinon gospel is this longer ending of Mark, exactly. And so what we think probably happened was that ending was preserved in the lectionary, in the services of the church. And then at some point it gets copied over when scribes are copying the Bibles, and it just gets, stuck, inserted somewhere.
What is the story at the end of Mark?
It's called the longer ending of Mark. So
but what is the story? What is the pericope?
Let me show you here. It's basically a final resurrection of appearance of Jesus before the ascension, or immediately before the ascension. So here you have, right. So here, here it even says other endings of Mark, the intermediate ending of Mark. So really, most people think that Mark ends here at verse 8, which again is a kind of strange ending, because it's the story how the women went to the tomb, found it empty, and then they flee from the tomb. They trembled and were amazed, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. And we actually think that was the original ending of Mark. They said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. And then again, it's a puzzling ending, because if they said nothing to anyone, how are we hearing the story, right? How did the story get spread? And the theory is that, again, it's inviting the reader, the Christian reader, to participate. In other words, it's saying you're going to be the one who tells the story, and again, this idea that the Gospels, the scriptures are not done. They're still being written through the life of the church. But anyway, so here, there's an intermediate ending, and then here's the long ending. So this we found in some manuscripts as an addition, but generally this longer one. So from verse 9 on, and here it's where he says, it's kind of like the Great Commission. So he comes in this resurrection appearance, he rebukes their unbelief. He tells them, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. And 17, and these signs will follow those who believe. In my name, they will cast out demons. They will speak with new tongues. They will take up serpents. And if they drink anything deadly, it will by no means hurt them. They will lay hands on the sick and they will recover. So this part in particular, I mean, this verse in particular is enacted exactly in the chapter we just read, Acts 28. Paul ends up inadvertently handling a serpent, and it doesn't kill him. And Paul and Luke lay hands on the sick and they recover. So continuing the work of Jesus. And then here in the longer ending, these last two verses, 19 and 20, is a quick kind of recap of the ascension. So yeah, it's an interesting, but particularly the connection with the serpents. There's got to be some kind of connection because Jesus specifically mentions this in the longer ending of Mark, and then we see it actually happening to Paul, showing that all these things that Jesus said and did and prophesied are coming true, and that the work of Jesus is continuing with the apostles and with the church.
Father, how did Luke die? Saint Luke. I can't remember. I know how Saint Mark died in Alexandria. We know that Peter and Paul, but for some reason I never questioned how did Luke die.
I can't recall right now. I have to look that up. I don't know.
Because I never thought about it before. Actually, I know about Thomas in India, but Matthew I think went to Ethiopia. But I just don't remember anything about Luke. And then also the other question I always had is, did Luke end up in Jerusalem? Now the Holy Mother went to Ephesus with John. We know that, but we know that Luke must have interviewed the Holy Mother and also made icons of her, from what I know. And so I keep questioning about that area, which was never clear to me, is when did he meet her, see her, interview her? Because only the Gospel of Luke gives you the details of the Annunciation, visitation, and so on of the early years of Jesus. And so I know that he must have gotten this from the Holy Mother, who's the only one who could have told him exactly what the angel said and so on.
Yeah.
Do we know anything about that?
Well, we could speculate a little bit. I mean, so we know that, before Paul takes this nautical adventure to get over to Rome, that he spends at least 2 years being held in Jerusalem or Caesarea by the Romans, and we know that Luke, the text of Acts indicates that Luke is hanging around in the area with Paul while he's under arrest. So we can assume that during those 2 years, that Luke is trying to be around Paul during his house arrest, being able to visit him, that Luke then would have taken that time to interview people, because he says in the beginning of Luke that he interviewed all these eyewitnesses and collected all these sources. So we can assume during that 2-year period he was busy, and we don't know exactly when he first becomes I'm trying to think when else he would have had contact, but anyway, he definitely had at least those 2 years to collect information from, firsthand sources or secondhand.
And in the hymnology of nowadays, where we are Panagia, we are fasting, talks about the directress, and the icon that Luke the evangelist had painted of the Holy Mother. And if that's in the hymnology of the church from the time the Holy Mother passed away, probably these hymns came out, who knows, before even the Gospels were put together. And I wonder about the fact that Luke was around at the time, maybe when she died and was assumed into heaven, of course, the dormition of the Holy Mother. I'm just always very curious about these things. And also, was Luke one of the 70? Or was he with Cleopas on the road to Emmaus?
Yeah, I believe he is considered one of the 70, and the church usually accepts that he was one of those on the road to Emmaus, although I think there is some question about that.
Okay, too many questions, but then lovely answers.
Oh, all right. Well, this wraps up Acts, so we will maybe take a off and then start again. I imagine maybe around the beginning of September, when we kick everything else off, we can start Bible study up again. I'm thinking to go to First Corinthians, but we'll have to decide on that.
Okay, very good. And Father, outside of Rome, I think when they did the beheading and the killing of any criminal, it did it outside the city walls of Rome. There is a church there outside Rome that where St. Paul was beheaded, and I think they call it the Church of St. Paul and Peter outside the walls.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah,
yeah,
and so I wondered whether where they were beheaded, that's where they built the church.
could be. Yeah, I can't recall right now.
Anyway, thank you.
Right. See you guys.
Hi, Carol. We'll be in
Good
touch.
to see you, Karen. Thank you for joining us. All right. God bless you guys. Bye.
You too, Father. Thank you very much.